Sin is rebellion. Read with me in Isaiah chapter 30, verses 1. It says this: Woe to the rebellious children, declares the Lord, to those who carry out a plan that is not mine, who form an alliance but against my will, heaping up sin upon sin. The book of Isaiah tells the story of Israel. So the overall narrative of the book of Isaiah comes in two parts. The first is that the prophet Isaiah brings warnings of judgment towards the corrupt leaders of Israel. It's the sad news that Israel's rebellion would come at a cost. However, the second part of Isaiah is a story of hope and bringing up of what Isaiah likes to call a suffering servant who would ultimately restore and bring new life. Now let's understand what Isaiah means when talking about rebellion, which is most noted in the failures of Israel in a few things. First, lack of trust in Yahweh. Second, practice of worshiping idols. And third, their lack of social justice. And so therefore, what this tells us contextually is that rebellion is the shifting of dependency. That humanity would choose to become dependent on one another and on the self rather than on God. And this is best summed up in Isaiah 29 verses 13, which says this: These people come near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship of me is based on merely human rules they have been taught. And I too am reminded of all the ways we have been wayward and perhaps have also failed to be faithful and lived as though I follow Jesus, but instead I consider man-made rules more important. Now remember, this is only the first part of the story of Isaiah. Let's not miss one of the most important themes of Isaiah, the promise of a servant Messiah. And if you have read the Synoptic Gospels, then you'd know that Isaiah prophesied about Jesus and how he ultimately redeems humanity and paints a beautiful picture of restoration and hope. In the death of Jesus, we come to know life and life in its fullest. Pastor Chris Price puts it this way: Christ's death brings forgiveness of sins, and Christ's resurrection brings assurance of freedom from sin. By no means is this a reason for anyone to continue to sin. Rather, it is a practice of the truth of Jesus' story. That the truth of Jesus bringing death to life should also be true for you and I. Christ frees us from the slavery of sin, and through his death and resurrection, all creation can live a new way of life through Jesus. And I'd like to leave with you two quotes to apply this passage today. Number one, Timothy Keller says, freedom isn't the absence of restriction, it's finding the right ones. Second, N.T. Wright proposes that creation is compared to an angled mirror, that the way we live our lives, the way we care for the world, for one another, reflects our Creator. And so therefore, what this means in application is the following. The first, let's recognize that real freedom and obedience is anchored under submission and under the rule of the gospel. That our obedience signifies death to our old life into a life anew. And second, let's all emulate being an angled mirror, that we may pursue Christ's likeness and practice the lifestyle of Jesus and make the choice to turn away from sin and live in obedience to God, to continue to choose Jesus over and over again.